All right, what is up, everybody? Today I'm going to be giving a lesson on warming up, static versus dynamic stretching, when to do it, what to do, what does it all look like, myths, and differentiating them from the facts based on what the science say. As always, my disclaimer here: you can, if you want, you can read this lesson in my course called the Peaks Formula on my website, peaksrunning.co, if you prefer to read it. Otherwise, if you prefer your content in audio/video form, here you go. All right. So getting right into it, looking at dynamic versus static stretching. Anytime you even begin the topic of stretching or warming up with runners, most people shamefully admit that they don't stretch or they don't stretch as much as they would like to. And I think the good news for them is that you may not need to stretch as often as you think, or at least for as long as you think you need to, depending on the activity. So first things first, let us define our terms to make sure we're on the same page. So when people refer to stretching, they're almost always referring to static stretching. Your toe touches, standing bent knee calf stretch, bent knee hip flexor stretch, all the stretches where you're just kind of in one position, holding one specific movement for an extended period of time, stretching a certain joint, and then the soft tissue attachments that override that joint. These all fit into the bucket of static stretching. Dynamic stretching, on the other hand, refers to a set of active movements working through a larger range of motion to prepare the following joints and soft tissues that span those joints for a specific activity. So what do we know about the two forms of stretching, the pros and cons of each, and when should they each be used? Static stretching, this is all based on what the research says up to date. Static stretching is best practiced after any kind of semi-strenuous activity or extended aerobic warm-up activity when the soft tissues are warm and most receptive to being stretched. This can help facilitate improvements in range of motion and flexibility, reduce muscle soreness, and potentially aid in recovery. On the contrary, static stretching before strenuous activity has been linked to several potential negative consequences, despite its seemingly universal recommendation by different medical professionals and athletes. There are numerous studies indicating that static stretching before activity can have a negative effect on force production, strength endurance, reaction time, and running speed. This is likely because static stretching reduces muscle stiffness and decreases neural activation, both of which are needed to produce that spring-like sensation that you feel in your legs that help you to run faster. If you're not concerned with running fast or experiencing any of the above potential consequences, then you are free to incorporate static stretching before exercise. Consistent static stretching as part of a daily routine for an extended period of time has been shown to increase range of motion around the involved joints and potentially improve strength over time. It has been found that positive results are most evident when focusing on stretching frequency. You can think of stretching more often throughout a given week rather than stretching duration throughout a single daily session. It is worth noting that, for good or for bad, the acute effects that are seen when performing static stretching are quite transient, ranging from a few minutes to about an hour, depending on the study you look at. This means that if you want to perform some light stretching several hours before a race, it will likely have no effect on the race performance. If you are not concerned with performance and want the benefits to be longer lasting, then you'll need to increase the number of times per day and week that you stretch. When it comes to injury prevention, the institution of a static stretching program before exercise has not been found to have any consistent effect on overall injury risk within multiple randomized controlled trials. Some speculate static stretching alone before high-level activity could increase injury risk by increasing one's subjective pain threshold through prolonged stretching and increasing musculotendinous units excessively, causing microtrauma in the process. There's no evidence to support this currently. If you want to incorporate static stretching before activity, it is likely safe if it is performed in conjunction with dynamic stretching and light exercise. Dynamic stretching is preferred prior to activity because it will move the involved joints throughout a greater range of motion than static stretching can accomplish, and the movements generally should be more sport-specific, targeting the involved muscles while also psychologically preparing the athlete for the movements needed to compete. There's no current evidence that dynamic stretching decreases injury risk compared to static stretching or those that do not stretch, just for the record. Last bullet point here, dynamic stretching is likely to improve performance due to its warming effect on muscles, ability to increase muscle tension, and increase recruitment of motor units within the involved muscle groups. Sorry. Everybody has different goals, events, and sports entirely that they're training for, from which they will experience the effects of the two primary forms of stretching to varying degrees. Use the information above to help you decide how you would like to stretch to best fit those needs. And then next I'll go into creating a pre-workout warm-up routine. And here I'll discuss creating a warm-up routine for running workouts specifically, since that's one I'm most frequently asked about and asked with leading athletes through. So for starters, the extent of the warm-up routine that is needed will depend on the intensity of the main activity that you're preparing for. If you're going out for a relaxed, easy run, you probably don't need much beyond some leg swings and a couple minutes of some optional dynamic exercises, thinking single leg hops, high knees, karaoke. I recommend approaching easy runs in a way that is akin to what's known as the Kenyan Shuffle, which is the name that has become associated with how many elite Kenyan runners will run on their easy days, particularly the days following hard workouts. They'll start out at a very slow jog that is several minutes per mile slower than their race pace and allow the pace to slowly increase incrementally in a way that is natural and not forced. Starting out at this slow pace allows for the muscles to slowly increase in temperature, increasing elasticity of the soft tissues and allowing them to stretch and glide over time in a way that carries a very low risk of injury because the training demand is so low. Early aerobic portion of the warm up, thinking usually 1-2 miles easy you might run prior to going to a more intense workout, which some may call the general warm up. Should also be approached in this way before going into a more dynamic, specific phase of the pre-workout routine. This very easy jog warm-up serves multiple purposes, including but not limited to the following. 1, it will help increase blood flow to active muscle groups. 2, will prepare the cardiorespiratory system for increased activity and output. 3, will activate metabolic processes to provide the necessary energy during the workout. And 4, increase psychological preparation for performance. After completing the general warm-up, the athlete goes into what is known as this quote-unquote specific warm-up, which is more dynamic and prepares them for the workout. When going through a set of dynamic stretching activities, the goal should be to go through a set of activities that are increasingly specific and intense in nature as the body gradually ramps up in preparation. This allows for a gradual increase in mobility as well as muscle contraction, which has been found to compound and produce greater force when exercises are introduced in this following stepwise fashion. Below is an example that I list here in the lesson, multiple bullet points of a dynamic ramp-up protocol that I use before workouts. And again, this is just an example of a routine that I would use, but I'm sure many people would have many different opinions on how they like to approach their dynamic workout routine prior to workouts. So I usually start with kind of some light skipping, some light single leg hops. I'll then go from there into some light two-legged hops. May or may not incorporate some Z hops, which if you can imagine like the lines on a track, like a white line that divides each of the lanes on a track, you kind of zigzag hopping between each side of the line. Do some variations of high knee skips, and then I'll go into more force, more like force related movements. So I'll take the single leg hops, but I'll do them more for distance, two-legged hops for distance. And then I do try to incorporate a little bit of lateral movement stuff as part of the warm-up routine, especially helping with hip mobility, since that is, something that's really lacking in running, since all of it's, linear movement. So I'll introduce some side shuffles, karaoke's, starting with having the legs hanging more low and then higher up with the hip drive. And then I'll go into single leg bounding. And then I'll usually end with 3 to 4 80 to 100 meter strides. And then, and I know this is backed in the research as well, if you're going to a hard workout, there's been extra benefits seen if you were to add in an additional like 200 meter hard interval, thinking around like 90% sprint effort prior to an intense anaerobic workout. And then I'll usually follow this up with a 5 to 8 minute rest period to allow the athlete to swap shoes into a workout shoe, getting electrolytes, fluids before going to the workout. Allow the heart rate to kind of come down a little bit so that they're just recovered to some degree before going to the workout, while not allowing enough time for those pre-workout benefits to wear off. So kind of trying to find the sweet spot there. So if you're not accustomed to going through a comprehensive dynamic warm-up routine before a workout, or at least one of this magnitude, I suggest compartmentalizing it and finding the middle ground between what makes your body feel prepared and what makes you fatigued, again, potentially hurting the quality of your workout. Something is certainly better than nothing, and I'm confident you'll most likely see a significant difference in the results of your workouts when you start to prepare for them with a thorough warm-up routine. All right, that's all I got.